Chapter 1. I was sitting on the bench in the barn. Not only was I aware of being there, in front of the sagging door that, with each swing, let in a gust of wind and snow, but I saw myself as clearly as in a mirror, noting the incongruity of my situation. The bench was a garden bench, painted red. We had 3 of them, which we put away for the winter along with the lawn mower, the garden tools and the window screens. The barn, also of wood painted red, had been a real barn 100 years earlier, but was now nothing more than a vast shed. If I begin with that particular moment, it's because it was a kind of awakening. I had not slept, yet I was emerging abruptly into reality. Or was it a new reality that was beginning? But then, when does a man begin to... No, I will not let myself go down that slippery slope. I am a lawyer by profession and have the habit, some even say the mania, of precision. And yet, I don't even know what time it might have been. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, at my feet, on the floor of beaten earth. The pink filament of the small flashlight was still shedding its last gleam without illuminating a thing anymore. With cold, numb fingers, I was trying to strike a match to light my cigarette. I needed to smoke. It was like a sign of recovered reality. The smell of tobacco felt reassuring to me, and I stayed there, leaning forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the huge banging door that might collapse at any moment under the onslaught of the storm. I had been drunk. I probably still was, which has happened to me only twice in my life. I remembered everything. However, the way you remember a dream when laying scraps of it end to end. After a trip to Canada, the Sanders had come to spend the weekend with us. Ray is one of my oldest friends. We studied law together at Yale, and later, after our marriages, we had kept up the connection. So, that evening, Saturday, 15th January, when the snow had already begun falling, I'd asked Ray, "How do you feel about coming along with us for drinks at old Ashbridge's place?" Harold Ashbridge, from Boston. Yes. I thought he spent the winter down at his home in Florida. 10 years ago. He bought some property about 20 miles from here to play the gentleman farmer. He's always there for Christmas and New Year's and only goes off to Florida around mid-January after a big party. Ashbridge is one of the few men who impress me, as is Ray. There are others. Actually, they aren't as rare as all that. Not to mention the women, Mona, for example, Ray's wife, whom I always see as an exotic little animal. Although as far as exotic goes, she's barely 1/4 Italian by blood. He doesn't know me. At Ashbridge's, you don't need to know anybody. Isabel was listening without saying a word. Isabel never intervenes in such moments. She is the docile wife par excellence. She does not protest. She simply watches you and passes judgment. At that point, there had been nothing to criticize in my behavior. We went every year to that party at the Ashbridges, which is like a professional obligation. Isabel did not point out that the snow was falling hard and that the drive up to North Hillsdale is a difficult one. In any case, the snowplow had certainly gone by. "What car are we taking?" "Mine," I said, and at the back of my mind, it's only now that I discover this. There was a tiny ulterior motive. Ray works on Madison Avenue. He is a partner in one of the biggest ad agencies. I see him almost every time I go to New York and am familiar with his routine. Without being a drinker, he does need 2 or 3 double martinis before each meal, like almost all those in his profession who live on their nerves. If he drinks a bit too much at the party, it's funny or tragic to recall those little details a few hours later. For fear that Ray might overindulge, I was taking precautions, arranging to be the driver on the way home. Except that I was the one who had got drunk. At first, there were at least 50 people, if not more. An immense buffet was set out in the front hall, but all the doors were open, with people coming and going, even in the upstairs bedrooms, and bottles and glasses were everywhere. May I introduce Mrs. Ashbridge, Patricia, my friend Ray. Patricia is only 30. She is Ashbridge's 3rd wife. She's very beautiful. Not beautiful like, I wouldn't say like Isabel, My wife has never been truly beautiful. Besides, I always find it difficult to describe a woman, and I automatically do so in relation to my wife. Isabel is tall, with a graceful figure, regular features, and a slightly condescending smile, as if those with whom she is speaking were at fault in some way. Well, Patricia is the opposite. On the small side, like Mona, even more of a brunette than she is, but with green eyes. And Patricia, she looks at you, fascinated, as if she desired nothing more than to learn your innermost thoughts, or to confide her own to you. Isabel never conjures up the image of a bedroom. Now, Patricia, she always makes me think of a bed. They say, but I pay no attention to what people say. First of all, I don't trust hearsay, and then I instinctively loathe indiscretion, so I hate backbiting all the more. The Russells were there, the Dyers, the Collinses, the Greens, the Hasburgers, the Ted hello, Dan hello, people talk, drink, come, go, nibble things that taste like fish, turkey or beef. I remember, a serious conversation off in the morning room with Bill Hasburger, who was thinking of sending me to Chicago to settle a legal matter. Those people are rich for most of the year. Don't ask me why. They live in our little corner of Connecticut, but they have business interests more or less throughout the country. Compared to them, I'm a poor man. Dr. Warren as well, with whom I chatted briefly. I was not drunk. Far from it. I don't know exactly when it all began, or rather, as of a few seconds ago. I do know, because on my bench, where I'm having at least my fifth cigarette, I'm suddenly discovering in myself a curious lucidity. I went upstairs for no reason, like others before and after me. I pushed open a door and quickly shut it, with just time enough to see Ray and Patricia in what wasn't even a bedroom, but a bathroom where they were making love, completely clothed. I may be 45 years old, but that image made such an impression that I can still see it in minute detail. Patricia saw me. I'm sure of that. I would even swear that the look in her eyes was not embarrassment, but a kind of amused defiance. That's very important. That image has considerable importance for me, sitting on my bench in the barn. I had only a presentiment of this, but later on, I had plenty of time to think about it. I'm not claiming that it's what drove me to drink, but it was about at that moment that I began draining all the glasses within reach. Isabel caught me, and I blushed. Naturally. "It's hot," I murmured. She did not advise me to be careful. She said nothing. She smiled, with her terrible smile that forgives, or that what later. I'm not there yet. There are so many other things to work out. One summer, I decided to clean up the barn, intending to empty it, throw things away, and neatly arrange what was worth keeping. After a few hours, overwhelmed, I sheepishly gave up. That's a little like what happens with another inventory, the one I undertook in the very same barn that night. This time, however, I'll finish the job, no matter what it costs and what I discover. Already there's the image of Ray and Patricia to be properly filed away. And shortly afterwards, the look in old Ashbridge's eyes. He's no drunk either, but a man who sips his drinks, especially after 5 in the afternoon. He's a bit portly, and his big pale eyes are always moist. "Well, Donald." The two of us weren't far from the buffet, with several noisy groups around us. We could hear various conversations overlapping at the same time. Why did I have the impression that we found ourselves suddenly isolated? He and I confronting each other. That's a better way to put it. For it was barely 5 minutes after the scene in the bathroom. He was looking at me calmly, but he was looking at me. I know exactly what I mean, most of the time, especially in such encounters. You don't really look at the other person. You know the person is there. You talk. You listen. You reply. You let your gaze wander to a face, a shoulder. See, he was looking at me, and the 2 words he'd just spoken took on the tenor of a question. "Well, Donald?" Well, what had he seen? 2. Did he know that I had seen? He was neither gloomy nor threatening. He was not smiling either. Was he jealous? Did he know that Patricia was in the habit of? I was the one who felt guilty as he continued. "Your friend Sanders is a remarkable fellow." Some people left, We could see them in the entryway, putting on their coats and rubber boots, which stood in a row shelf. Each time the front door opened and closed, it let in a gust of icy air. Then there was the sound of the wind, monotonous at first, blustery in bursts later on. And the guests began to look questioningly at one another. It's still snowing, yes. Well, then we're going to get a blizzard. Why I kept drinking, which was so unlike me, I still don't understand. I went from one group to another. Familiar faces began to seem different to me. I believe I even sneered, and that Isabel saw me at it. A kind of uneasiness began to set in. Certain guests lived rather far away, some in New York, others in Massachusetts, and had up to 40 miles to cover to get home. I was one of the last to go. I heard raised voices, exclamations whenever a group was leaving, and a particularly violent blast entered the house. In an hour, there'll be 3 feet of snow. I don't know who said that. Then Isabel took my arm in a relaxed way, like a good wife, quite naturally. I understood, nevertheless, that it was time for us to leave as well. Where is Mona? She went to get her mink in Pat's bedroom. And Ray. Ray was in front of me. The everyday Ray. The Ray I'd been used to for 25 years. Are we leaving? He asked. I think so. Yes. It seems you can't see a thing in front of you. I did not shake Patricia's hand the way I had those other times. I admit that I made this somewhat obvious, that I took a perverse pleasure in doing so. Did old Ashbridge notice? Get in the car. Kids. There were only 3 or 4 cars left out in the driveway. The already savage wind was blowing so much snow hard into our faces that we had to walk bent over. The 2 women climbed into the rear seats. I took the wheel, without Isabel asking me if I were in a fit state to drive. I was neither depressed nor tired. On the contrary, I felt pleasantly elated, and the roaring of the storm made me feel like singing. And that's one down. One what? Party. There's still one left. Next week at the Russells. After which things will be quiet until the spring. At times the windshield wipers jammed for a moment before starting up again. The snow streamed by in almost horizontal white stripes in front of the headlights, and I used the black line of the trees to guide me because the edges of the road were no longer visible. Behind me, I could hear, in the warmth of the car and their fur coats, the two women exchanging banal remarks. You weren't too bored, Mona. Not at all. Patricia's charming. Actually, everyone was nice. In 3 days, they'll be swimming in Florida. Ray and I think we'll spend a few days in Miami next month. I had to lean forwards to see ahead of me, and several times I got out of the car to scrape ice off the windshield. The third time, I felt as if I would be carried off by the blizzard. We have them every winter, more or less powerful storms. We know the treacherous places, the snowdrift spots, the roads to avoid. How did we get back to Brentwood? Through Copake, eh? Or Great Barrington, I couldn't tell you. This one is a beaut, Ray old buddy. A beautiful snowstorm, a true blizzard. When I turned on the radio, that was in fact the word they were using. Up by Albany. They were already talking about winds of more than 60 miles an hour. And hundreds of cars were snowed in on roads to the north. Instead of worrying me, the news excited me as if I were welcoming with relief a little something extraordinary into my life. We were not talking much. Ray and I. He was staring straight ahead, frowning whenever the visibility dropped close to zero. Then, on purpose, I would drive faster. I had no score to settle with him. He was my friend. He hadn't wronged me in any way by making love with Patricia Ashbridge. I wasn't in love with her. I wasn't in love with any woman. I was content with Isabel. What score would I have had to settle? I had to spend a few minutes maneuvering around a snowdrift and used one of the bags of sand we always keep in the car trunk in the winter. I had snow in my eyes, nose, ears, and some was getting in through the gaps in my clothing. Where are we? 3 more miles. Yeah. It was harder and harder to make any progress. Even though we'd seen 3 plows, the snow piled up as soon as they had passed, and our windshield wipers were now useless. I kept having to leave the car to scrape the windshield. Are we still on the road? Isabel's voice was calm. She was asking the question. That's all. I assume so, I replied gaily. The truth was, I no longer knew. It was only in crossing the small stone bridge a mile from home that I regained my bearings, except that after the bridge, the snow had formed an actual wall in which the front of the car embedded itself. That's it, folks. Everyone out. What do you mean, everyone out? The Chrysler is not a bulldozer. We'll have to keep going on foot. Ray looked at me, wondering if I was serious. Isabel had understood, since this had happened to us twice before. Are you taking the flashlight? I removed it from the glove compartment and switched it on. It had been some months, perhaps 2 years, since we last used it, and as we might have expected, it produced only a yellowish gleam. Let's go. Things were still cheerful at that moment. I can still see the women arm in arm, huddled forward, pressing on through the snow up ahead. I followed with the flashlight, and Ray walked silently beside me. No one said anything. Actually, it was already rather hard to breathe in the blizzard without wasting more breath. Isabel fell, got gamely to her feet. Sometimes the two women vanished into the darkness. I would shout, my hand in front of my mouth to ward off the freezing air. Yoo-hoo! And a vague yoo-hoo would echo a reply. The flashlight beam was weakening. All of a sudden, when we must have been only 300 or 400 yards from our place, it died completely. Yoo-hoo, yoo-hoo. I had to be quite close to the women because I heard the snow crunching. I could also hear, to my right, Ray's footsteps. My head began to spin. The energy the alcohol had given me was ebbing away, and it was more and more difficult to advance. In my chest, right where my heart was, I thought. I felt a pain that worried me. Hadn't men my age, even strong, healthy men, died like this of heart attacks in the cold and snow? Yoo-hoo! I felt dizzy. I labored with each step. I couldn't see a thing anymore. I could hear only that aggressive uproar of the blizzard, and I was covered in snow. I don't know how long that lasted. I was paying no more attention to the others. I was still holding on, stupidly, to the dead flashlight, and was stopping every 2 or 3 steps to catch my breath. Finally, there was a wall, a door opening. Come in, a gust of warmth in the darkness of the house, and Ray, I did not understand. I wondered why the women hadn't turned on the lights. I reached for the switch. There's no electricity. Easy. Where's Ray? He was close by me. I called to him from the threshold. Ray? Hey, Ray? I seemed to hear a voice, but it's easy to hear voices in a blizzard. Ray. Take the flashlight from the night table. We keep a smaller flashlight on our night table because the electricity sometimes goes off. I fumbled my way slowly through the rooms, bumping into furniture I did not recognize. Then a gleam appeared behind me. One of the red candles from the dining room. It was strange to see Isabel emerge dimly from the darkness, holding aloft one of the silver candelabras. You found it. Yes. I had the flashlight in my hand, but it was hardly brighter than the one from the car had been. Don't we have any spare batteries? Aren't there any in the drawer? No. I wanted a drink to buck me up, but didn't dare have one. The women said nothing to me. They did not urge me on. Even so, I felt that they were sending me out, armed with a half-dead flashlight, to search for Ray in the blizzard. I will say everything, obviously. Otherwise, it would not have been worthwhile to begin. And first of all, at no moment of the evening was I completely drunk. If I try to define my state as accurately as possible, I'd say that I possessed a warped lucidity. Reality existed around me, and I was in contact with it. I was aware of my actions. Taking pencil and paper, I could record almost exactly the words I spoke at the Ashbridge party, in the car afterwards, and later at home, suffering from the cold on my bench. However, where I lit one cigarette after another, I was entering. I felt a new lucidity, which made me uneasy and was beginning to frighten me. I could sum it up in a word, in 4 words, rather, which I seemed to hear out loud. You have killed him. Perhaps not in the legal sense, but then again, isn't the refusal to help someone in danger considered a kind of crime? When I had left the house, when the 2 women had sent me out to look for Ray, I had gone immediately to the right, more precisely, to fool them. in case they'd been watching me from the window and seen the glint from my flashlight. I'd first walk straight ahead for a few yards and then, safe in the darkness, I had veered right, knowing that I would find the barn about 30 yards along. I was physically exhausted and think I can say that my morale was spent as well. This enormous storm, this world gone mad that had earlier elated me to the brink of nervous hilarity, now suddenly scared me. Why had the women stayed in the house? Why hadn't they, too, come along to search? I thought back to Isabel, impassive, looking like a statue with her silver candelabra held a little higher than her shoulder. Mona, her features blurred in the shadowy light, had said nothing. Neither of them had seemed to understand that a real tragedy was taking place, and that by sending me outside, they were putting me too in danger. My heart was beating too fast in fits and starts. At every moment I kept losing my breath. I was afraid. I've already said so. I called out 1 or 2 times more. Ray. It would have been a miracle if he had heard me, just as it would have been if he had glimpsed the glow, way too weak, of the flashlight through the snow, falling almost parallel to the ground. It wasn't falling. It was whipping, thrown forward in actual clumps that hit you in the face and smothered you. I heard the barn door creak and rushed inside, where I collapsed on the bench, a red bench, a garden bench. I did see the grotesque aspect of the situation in the middle of the night, in the middle of a blizzard. A 45-year-old man, a lawyer and respectable citizen, sitting on a red bench, lighting a first cigarette with a trembling hand as if this were going to warm him up. I killed him. Perhaps not yet. Doubtless he was still alive, but dying, in danger of death. He was not familiar, as I was, with the area around the house, and if he veered to the right, if he was off by just a few yards, he would tumble down a small cliff into a freezing stream. That was nothing to me. I did not have the courage to look for him, to run the slightest risk. On the contrary, and here is where I've arrived, where I am indeed forced to end up. Here is where I was heading little by little. On that particular night, the night of 15 to 16 January, on my bench. In the barn, what was happening to Ray did not displease me. Would I have been in the same frame of mind if I had not been drinking at the Ashbridges party? This problem is difficult to resolve, and in the end, does not change much. Would I have felt the same perverse relief if I had not pushed open the bathroom door and surprised Ray making love with Patricia now? That's different. I'm getting to the heart of my ruminations. For what I was indulging in on my bench were ruminations rather than coherent reflections. I had the time. I was supposed to look for Ray. The longer I stayed outdoors, the more thanks I would receive. What Ray was doing that evening in the bathroom with a woman he had known for barely 2 hours, one as beautiful and desirable as Patricia, was something I dreamed of doing 100, 1,000 times. He had married Mona, who, like Patricia, makes men think of a bed. Me, I married Isabel. I might almost say that's all there is, but it isn't. I had begun, God knows why, tearing off a corner from everyday truth, begun seeing myself in another kind of mirror. And now the whole of the old, more or less comfortable truth was falling to pieces. This went back to Yale. This went back to before Yale, before I knew Ray. This went back, in the end, to my childhood. I would have liked. Where are words when you need them? I would have liked to do everything, be everything, be daring in every way, to look people in the eye, to tell them, to look at people the way old Ashbridge does. For example, before whom, earlier that evening, I had felt like a little boy. He didn't bother to speak, to strike an attitude. He didn't try to communicate. I was in front of him. Was he perhaps looking straight through my head? I was of no importance. He was 70 years old and had never been handsome. He drank his little drinks that gave his eyes that glazed look, and dozens of guests had invaded his house. Did he worry about what they thought of him? He provided them with food, drink, armchairs, open bedrooms, as well as the bathroom where Patricia. Did he know that his wife was cheating on him? Did he suffer because of it? Did he, on the contrary, despise poor Ray, who had merely followed so many others and who, within 5 minutes, would no longer matter, who already no longer mattered, whom Patricia would perhaps that very evening replace with a successor in the same or some other room I didn't admire, Ashbridge, simply because he was rich and had interests in 50 different business ventures, from commercial shipping to television stations. When he had moved into the area 10 years earlier, I would have liked to have had him as a client, to have acquired just a tiny part of his affairs to look after. One of these days, I'll have to have a talk with you, he'd told me. The years had passed, and he had never had that talk. I did not resent him for that. With Ray, it was different, because Ray and I were the same age, had almost the same background. We'd studied the same things, and at Yale, I'd been more brilliant than he was, and he'd become an important figure on Madison Avenue, whereas I was just a plucky little lawyer in Brentwood, Connecticut. Ray was taller than I was, stronger than I was. At 20, he could already look at people the way old Ashbridge did. I've met other men of their kind. I have some for clients. My attitude towards them varies depending on the day and my mood. At times, I'm convinced that it's admiration. At other moments, I admit to a certain envy. Well, I knew this now. I'd just discovered it on my bench. It was hatred. They frightened me. They were too strong for me. Or I was the one too weak for them. I remember the evening when Ray introduced me to Mona, who was wearing a little black silk dress, underneath which you could sense her body, alive in its smallest recesses. Why not me? For me, Isabel. For him, Mona. And if I chose Isabel, isn't that precisely because I never dared to speak to a Mona, to a Patricia, to all the women whom I've desired to the point of clenching my fists in rage? The wind was blowing so violently that I expected to see the roof fly off the barn, its upper hinge broken. The door now sagged crookedly, which did not prevent it from striking muffled blows against the wall. The snow whirling inside the barn almost reached my feet, and I kept thinking in a kind of delirium, a cold delirium, a lucid delirium. I killed you, Ray. And what if I went to tell them this? Those two women, nice and warm in the house, In the candlelight, I killed Ray. They would not believe me. I was not even the man to kill Ray or to kill anyone. I had just done so, however, and this flooded me with a sense of physical joy, as if I had just cheered myself up with a potent drink. Stood up. After all, I was not supposed to spend hours outside. Besides, I was frozen stiff and was scared about my heart. I have always been afraid that my heart would suddenly stop beating. I plunged out into the snow that was hitting my face, my chest, enveloping my legs. I had to make an effort to hoist out one foot, then the other. Ray! I had to make sure I did not make a mistake and stray from the path. The house was invisible. I had taken my bearings when I'd left the barn. All I had to do now was walk straight ahead. And what if I found Ray in front of the living room fireplace with the two women I imagined them, watching me enter like a ghost, smiling and saying, "Why did you stay out so long?" That frightened me so much that I managed to walk faster, so that I bumped into the wall of the house. I felt my way along to the door. No one had heard me arrive. I turned the knob and saw first the logs burning in the fireplace, then someone in an armchair wearing Isabel's light blue peignoir. It wasn't Isabel. It was Mona. Where is she, Isabel? She went to fix something to eat, but Donald. It was almost a shout. Donald. She did not rise from her armchair. She did not look at me. She stared at the flames in the hearth. Her face reflected no feeling. She looked stunned. In a low voice she added, "You didn't find him?" "No." "Watching the time go by?" "Yes." Seeing the time pass, she had begun to understand. "Still, he's a strong man," I said, "more vigorous than I am. Perhaps what? How to lie, and how could Ray have oriented himself in that ocean of snow and ice? Isabel arrived, candelabra in one hand, a plate of sandwiches in the other. She looked at me. Her face became paler, her features more rigid. "Eat, Mona." "How long does it take to die, buried in snow?" "Another 3 or 4 hours, and day would begin to break." Did you try telephoning? I asked. The lines are dead. She looked pointedly at a small transistor. We've been getting the news every 15 minutes. It seems the storm stretches from the Canadian border to New York, almost everywhere, out in the countryside. The phone and electricity are cut. In a dull voice, she added, Ray should have held on to your arm, the way Mona and I were walking. He was at my right, not far from me. Mona wasn't crying. She was holding a sandwich and finally took a bite. Have you anything to drink, Isabel? Some beer spirits. I can't fix you anything hot because the stove is electric. Some whiskey. You ought to take a bath, too, Donald. Later. There won't be any more hot water. It's true. The oil burner shuts down. Everything is electric. Even the clocks. Except for the little one in our bedroom. Now, I understood why Mona was wearing Isabel's bathrobe. My wife had made her take a bath to relax as well as warm her. Did you go as far as the car? Yes. Again, I felt a rush of fear. What if, while zigzagging in the snow, Ray had wound up back at the car? The smartest thing would then have been to shelter inside it, muffling up there as best he could to wait for daylight. Our house, Yellow Rock Farm, is not on the road. We have a private access road of more than half a mile. As for the neighbors, they're about a mile away. From what I know of Ray, my wife began. I waited for the rest with curiosity. He'll have pulled through. Not me, but him. Because it's Ray. Because it's someone other than Donald Dodd. Aren't you going to have a bath? Take the candle. We'd best not waste them. And light only one at a time. Here, we have the fireplace flames. The radiators were going to grow cold. They were cooling already. In a few hours, there would be no more heat except in the living room. We'd be forced to huddle there, all three of us, as close as possible to the hearth. It was my turn to carry the candelabra to find my way to our bedroom. I began wanting a drink again, retracing my steps. I found Isabel pouring Mona a whiskey. I took a glass from the cupboard, picked up the bottle in turn, and understood my wife's look. Still no reproach. Not even a mute warning. It was different. It had been going on for years, doubtless for as long as we'd known each other, a sort of official record. She noticed things without commentary, as if without passing judgment, and even forbidding herself to do so. The facts were nevertheless all there in columns, perfectly organized, one after the other. There must have been thousands, tens of thousands of them. 17 years of life together, not counting a 1-year engagement. I served myself generously on purpose, pouring the double, if not the triple, of my usual amount. Cheers, Mona. A silly thing to say, but she didn't seem to hear. I drank greedily. The warmth spread through me, and only then did I realize how cold my body was. The bathroom reminded me of the one at the Ashbridges' house, and a thought of humiliating vulgarity occurred to me. At least he will have had one last pleasure. Why was I so sure that Ray was dead? The hypothesis about the car was plausible. Perhaps Isabel was right. She had no idea that I hadn't gone that far. He might also have reached, although that was more difficult, one of the surrounding houses. Since the telephone was out of order, it was impossible for him to let us know. Killed him. Mona had the same impression as I did. I'd seen that in her attitude. Does she really love Ray? Are there people who go on loving one another after a certain number of years? Ray and Mona have no children. Us! We've got two girls who are at Adams, one of the best boarding schools in Connecticut, in Litchfield, run by Miss Jenkins. Did they have light? In Litchfield, Mildred is 15, Cecilia 12, and every 2 weeks they come and spend the weekend at the house. Luckily, this had not been one of their weekends. The water was running in the bathtub. I put my hand under the faucet in time to notice that the water was now cold, and I had to settle for a third of the bathtub. It was an odd feeling that night to be an honorable man. One of the 2 partners of the firm of Higgins and Dodd, married, the father of 2 girls, the owner of Yellow Rock Farm, one of the oldest and most pleasant houses in Brentwood. And to think about having just killed a man. By omission, true. By having failed to look for him. Who knows if I had spent hours with my dying flashlight, wandering in the snow, it is possible, even probable, that I would not have found him. In my mind, then, that was closer to it. I had not searched. As soon as I could not be seen from the house, I had veered off towards the barn to take shelter. Would Mona be in despair? Did she know that Ray was having sex with other women whenever he got the chance? Who knows if she wasn't like Patricia? Perhaps Ray and Mona weren't jealous and told each other about their adventures. I promised myself to look into that. If anyone ought to profit from that, it was I. I almost fell asleep in my bath and was careful not to slip getting out of the tub, because I did not feel too sure of my movements. What would we do? All three of us. Going to bed wasn't likely. Do you go to bed when the husband of a guest? No, we wouldn't go to bed. Besides, the rooms were growing chilly, and I was shivering in my bathrobe. I chose some gray flannel pants and a thick pullover I usually wore only to shovel snow along the driveway. One of the 2 candles was finished, so I lit the second one and put on my slippers to head for the living room. Do you know if there's more wood in the cellar? We hardly ever used any. We only had a fire in the fireplace when we had friends over. To get to the cellar, we raised a trap door and went down a ladder, which complicated the fetching of any logs. I think we still have some. I looked automatically at the bottle of scotch. When I'd left the 2 women, the bottle had been half full. Now it was almost empty. Isabel had followed my glance, evidently, and again, evidently, had understood. With another look, she gave me the answer, gazing at Mona, asleep in her armchair, her face crimson, her peignoir, in falling slightly open, had uncovered a bare knee. Chapter 2. When I half opened my eyes, I was lying on the couch in the living room, where someone had covered me with the red, blue, and yellow plaid throw blanket. The sun was up, but its light shone only weakly through the window panes thick with frozen snow. What first struck me, and had perhaps awakened me, was the familiar odor of ordinary mornings, the smell of coffee. Memories of the previous evening and night returned. I wondered if the electricity was back on. Turning my head a little, I caught sight of Isabel on her knees at the hearth. I had a really bad headache and was not pleased at having to tackle the reality of a new day. I would have liked to fall back asleep, but before I had time to close my eyes again, my wife asked, "Did you get some rest?" "I think so." "Yes?" I got up and realized that I had been drunker than I'd thought. My whole body hurt, and I felt dizzy. "Coffee will be ready in a minute." It was my turn to ask, "Did you sleep?" I dozed. Well, no. She had watched over the both of us, Mona and me. She had been magnificent, as always. It was in her nature to behave perfectly, whatever the circumstances. I imagined her sitting up straight in her armchair, looking from one to the other of us, sometimes rising quietly to stoke the fire. Then, at the first glimmer of dawn, snuffing out the precious candle and going to the kitchen to look for the pot with the longest handle. While we were sleeping, she had thought of the coffee. "Where is Mona?" She went to get dressed in the guest room at the end of the corridor, with windows that looked out over the pond. I remembered the 2 blue leather suitcases that Ray had carried in the previous day, before the evening at the Ashbridges' house. How is she? It hasn't sunk in yet. I was listening to the storm, still as strong as when I had fallen asleep. Isabel poured me coffee in my usual cup. We each had our own cups, and mine was a little larger because I drink lots of coffee. "We'll have to bring up some wood." There were no more logs in the basket to the right of the fireplace, and those burning there would soon crumble to ash. "I'll go. You don't want me to help you." "No, no." I understood. She'd glanced at me 2 or 3 times and knew I had a hangover. She knew everything. Why bother trying to deceive her? I finished my coffee, lit a cigarette, went into the little room next to the living room, the one we call the library because one wall is covered with books. Folding back the oval carpet, I uncovered the trap door. I lifted it and only then remembered that I would need a candle. All this is confused, unreal. How many candles are left? 5. Just now, I got Hartford on the radio. It's the nearest big city. Most of the countryside is in the same fix we are. They're working everywhere to repair the lines, but there are still places they can't get to. I imagined the men outside in the blizzard, climbing the poles, and the tow trucks making their way through the ever thicker snow. I descended the ladder, holding my candle, and went towards the back of the cellar carved out of the bedrock, the yellow rock that had given its name to the former farm. I was tempted to sit down to be alone, so that I could think, but think about what it was over. There was nothing more to think. Now I had to bring up some wood. My memory of that morning is vaguely sinister, like certain Sundays of my childhood, when rain kept me inside and I didn't know what to do with myself. Then I would feel that people and things were not where they should be, that sounds were different, both those in the street and those inside. I felt at a loss, with a small knot of anguish in the deepest part of me. That reminds me of a silly detail. My father would lie in bed longer than on other days, and sometimes I'd see him shave. He came and went, wearing an old bathrobe, and his smell was different, like the smell of my parents' bedroom, perhaps because it was tidied up only later in the day. Good morning, Donald. Did you manage to sleep a little? Yes. Thanks. Me, you know. She was wearing black slacks and a yellow sweater, hair and makeup just so. She was smoking a cigarette with a weary air while stirring her spoon in her cup. What are we going to do? She was just making conversation, carelessly, watching the flames. I think, at a pinch, that I can fix you some fried eggs. There are eggs in the fridge. I'm not hungry. Neither am I. If there's any more coffee. Coffee. Cigarettes as far as I was concerned. That was all I wanted. I went to peek out the door, which I had to hold tightly against the blowing snow, and could barely recognize our surroundings. The snow formed waves more than a yard high. It was still falling, as heavily as during the night, and you could hardly see the red mass of the barn. You think we could try? Isabel asked me. Try what? Going to look for Ray. I'll put on my boots and sheepskin jacket. I'll go with you. Me too. All this made no sense, and I knew it. I felt like telling them quietly, it's useless to look for Ray. I killed him. Because I remembered having killed him. I remembered everything that had happened on the bench. Everything I had thought. Why was my wife constantly darting glances at me in her eyes? I'd done some drinking. Of course, that's not a crime. A man has the right, twice in his life, to get drunk. I had picked the wrong evening, but I'd had no way of knowing that. Besides, it was Ray's fault. If he hadn't dragged Patricia into the upstairs bathroom, tough luck. I was going to pretend again. I put on my boots. I put on my sheepskin jacket. Isabel did the same, telling Mona, "No, no, you stay here. Someone has to keep the fire going." We walked side by side, basically pushing ourselves through the snow, which piled up in front of us as we tried to advance. The cold stiffened our faces. My head was spinning, and I was afraid every instant that I would collapse, worn out. I didn't want to be the first to give up. "It's useless," Isabel finally decided. Before going inside, we scraped clear one of the windows so we would now have some view of the outdoors. Mona had returned to her place by the fire and asked us no questions. She was listening to the radio. Hartford was announcing that roofs had been torn off, that hundreds of drivers were trapped on the roads. They mentioned the places most affected, but Brentwood was not among them. "We still have to eat," making up her mind. Isabel went off to the kitchen, and we were left side by side, Mona and I. I wonder if that was really the first time that we'd found ourselves alone in a room. Anyway, I thought it was, and that gave me an uneasy pleasure. How old was she? 35. Older. She had done some theater a while back, and a bit of television. Her father was a playwright. He wrote successful musical comedies and had had a rather tumultuous life until his death 3 or 4 years back. What was mysterious about Mona? Nothing. She was a woman like any other. Before marrying Ray, she must have had some affairs. All this seems so unreal to me. Donald. I looked at her and found her touching. I would have liked to take her in my arms, hold her close, stroke her hair. Were those the actions of a Donald Dodd? It seems that way to me, too. You risked your life last night, leaving to look for him. I kept quiet. I wasn't ashamed. Deep down, I was enjoying this moment of intimacy. "Ray was a great guy," she murmured a little later. She was speaking of him as if he were someone already far away, with, I thought, a sort of detachment. After a fairly long silence, she added, "We got along well, the two of us." Isabel returned with a pan and some eggs. "This is the easiest thing to prepare. There's some ham in the fridge for whoever wants some." As she had in the morning, she knelt down before the hearth, where she managed to settle the pan on an even keel. What were people doing in the other houses? The same thing, probably, except that not everyone had a fireplace or wood. The Ashbridges would definitely be obliged to postpone their departure for Florida. And the girls, off at Adams, did they have anything to heat with? Up there, I reassured myself Litchfield was a rather important town, and there had been no mention of power outages in the towns, the most powerful blizzard in 72 years. After the news, the radio went back to singing, and I turned the dial. We had to eat quite close to the fire, because at a few yards away, you could already feel the bitter cold. Why, Isabel? For as long as we've known each other, as I've said, she has constantly looked at me in a certain way. But it seemed to me that on that morning there was something different. I even had the feeling, at one point, that her look meant, "I know," without anger, not like an accusation, like a simple observation. "I know you, and I know. It's true that my hangover was not going away, and that at least twice I'd almost went off to throw up my lunch. I was anxious to drink something to get me back on my feet. I didn't dare. Why? Always questions. I've spent my life asking myself questions. Not many. A few. Some rather idiotic, without ever finding satisfactory answers. I'm a man. Isabel had found it normal, the previous evening, to see about 50 men and women drink beyond all measure. Well, I had almost felt that I should sneak those glasses I was grabbing from the tables and draining on the fly. Why, she had been the first when we arrived home to pour a scotch for Mona, even though she was a woman, while I had waited a long time before daring to get myself one. What was preventing me now from opening the liquor cabinet, taking out a bottle and fetching a glass from the kitchen? I needed a drink. I was literally staggering. I had no desire to get drunk, wanted only to steady my nerves. It took me more than half an hour, and even then, I cheated. "Wouldn't you like a scotch, Mona?" She looked at Isabel as if to ask permission, as if my offer didn't count. Perhaps it would do me some good. How about you, Isabel? No, thanks. Outside of the evenings we spend at parties or giving one at our house, I usually drink only a single whiskey a day. After getting home from the office for dinner, Isabel often has one with me. Quite a weak one. It's true. She is not a Puritan. She does not criticize either people who drink or those of our friends who lead more or less irregular lives. So, why that fear? For God's sake, because anyone might have thought that I was afraid of her. Afraid of what? Of a reproach. She had never reproached me for anything. What then afraid of a look? The way I was scared, as a child, of the look in my mother's eyes. Isabel is not my mother. Am her husband, and we have had 2 children together. She never undertakes anything without asking my advice. She is nothing like the pushy, dominating woman so many husbands complain about. And when we are with other people, she always leaves the talking to me. She is calm, quite simply, serene. Wouldn't that word explain everything? Cheers, Mona. Cheers, Donald. And to you, Isabel. Mona wasn't trying to put on a show of grief. Perhaps she was suffering, but it must not have been a wrenching sorrow. She had said, as if truly from her heart, Ray was a great guy. Was that not revealing? A fellow something like a pal, a good friend with whom one has traveled a while through life in as pleasant a way as possible. That was also what was attracting me. For a long time, I had had a sense of that peaceful and indulgent understanding between them. Ray had wanted Patricia Ashbridge, and he had taken her without worrying. I'm sure of that now, about whether his wife would learn of it or not. I think the wind is dying down. Our ears were so used to the noise of the storm that we noticed the slightest change. It was true, we were still a long way from silence, but the intensity of the sound had dropped, and, looking out of the window we'd tried to scrape clear, I thought the flakes were falling almost vertically, although just as thickly. Emergency teams were working all over the area to clear the roads, and ambulances were trying to get through to reportedly dozens of dead and injured. I wonder what will happen. It was Mona talking, as if asking herself the question, The snow would not melt for several weeks. Once the roads were cleared, they would deal with our access road. Then crews would undoubtedly come to look for Ray's body, and after that, Ray and Mona had a handsome apartment in one of the most pleasant and elegant neighborhoods of Manhattan in Sutton Place by the East River. Would she return to live there alone? Would she try to get work again in the theater, in television? She had been right a little earlier. It was all unreal, incomprehensible, and during my meditation on the bench in the barn, I had not thought for one instant about Mona's future. Killed Ray, so be it. I had taken revenge in a rather foul and cowardly way, without worrying about the consequences. In reality, I had not killed anyone. It was useless to boast. I could have floundered around in the snow for the rest of the night with absolutely no chance of finding my friend. I had killed in thought, in intention, not even in intention, because that would have required a cold-bloodedness I had not possessed at that moment. Maybe we should bring mattresses in front of the fire and try to sleep, suggested Isabel. Not you. Mona, let Donald and me do it. We went to the guest bedroom for that mattress, and then upstairs to get the two girls' mattresses, which were narrow and light. I wondered somewhat foolishly if we were going to place them side by side, thus making a kind of huge bed on which all three of us would sleep. And I'm sure Isabel guessed what I was thinking. She left about the same space between the mattresses that usually separates twin beds, and then she went to get some blankets. I could be mistaken. I probably am. During the short time in which we were again alone, Mona looked at me, then at the mattresses. Was she wondering which would be hers and which mine? Was there, I won't say a temptation, but some vague notion in the back of her mind after Isabel had returned and spread out the blankets? We hesitated for a second, and this time I am certain of what I'm saying. Isabel did not just happen to choose the mattress on the right, leaving me the one in the middle and saving the one on the left for Mona. She was putting me, on purpose, between the two of them. This meant, you see, I have confidence in me or in Mona True. It might also mean I'm leaving you free. I have always left you free, or even you really wouldn't dare. It was just past noon, and we all three tried to get some sleep. The last thing I remember was Mona's hand on the parquet floor between our two mattresses. That morning, in my sleepy state, was taking on an extraordinary significance. For a long while, I wondered if I would dare reach out my hand to touch her as if by accident. I was not in love. It was the gesture that counted. The audacity of the gesture. I felt that it would be a deliverance, but my mind must already have been fogging over because the image of the hand turned into that of a dog I recognized. The dog owned by one of our neighbors when I was 12. I must have been asleep. The electricity came back on shortly after 10 o'clock that evening, and it was a curious sight to see all the lamps in the house suddenly turn on by themselves while the candle kept burning. Almost ridiculous with its reddish flame. We looked at one another, relieved, as if it were the end of all our problems, all our sorrows. I went down into the cellar to turn the heat back on. When I came upstairs again, Isabel was trying out the telephone. Is it working? Not yet. Once more, I imagined the men outside, climbing the telephone poles with those strange metal half circles on their feet that enable them to clamber up like monkeys. I've often dreamed of climbing poles like that. Where are we sleeping? Asked Mona. The bedrooms will take a while to heat up. We'll have to wait at least 2 or 3 hours. We did not talk much that Sunday, neither during the day nor in the evening. If I were to write out the string of words we said, it wouldn't make 3 pages. No one tried to read. It was even more out of the question to play any kind of game. Luckily, there were the flames dancing in the fireplace, and we spent most of our time gazing at them. We went to bed fully dressed, in the same places as that afternoon, but I did not see Mona's hand on the floor. At one point, I heard movements around me. I saw Isabel standing in front of the fireplace, folding a blanket. I didn't need to ask her what was happening. She had read the question in my eyes. It's 6 o'clock. The bedrooms are warm. It would be better to finish the night in our beds. Mona was kneeling on her mattress, her face flushed, her eyes dazed with sleep. I helped Isabel carry Mona's mattress off to the guest room. where the two women remade the bed. I went to undress in our bedroom, then put on pajamas and was in bed when my wife arrived. "She's taking it quite calmly," she said. Isabel was speaking calmly herself, as if mentioning something of little importance. Later, she touched my shoulder. "The telephone, Donald." At first I thought that someone had called us, that the telephone had rung, and I thought immediately of Ray. Isabel had simply wanted to indicate that the telephone was working. The old clock on the chest of drawers said 7:30. I got up. I went to drink a glass of water in the bathroom and ran a comb through my hair while I was there. Then, sitting on the side of my bed, I called the police in Canaan. Still busy. 10 times. 20 times. The busy signal. Finally, a tired voice. "This is Donald Dodd in Brentwood." Dodd. Yes. The lawyer. "I know you." "Mr. Dodd." "To whom am I speaking?" "Sergeant Tomasi." "What's wrong at your place?" "Lieutenant Olson isn't there. He spent the night here, like the rest of us." "Would you like me to put him on the line?" "Yes, please. Tomasi." "Hello." "Lieutenant Olson." "Olson here." "Yes." "This is Dodd. How are you?" Isabel could not see my face, since my back was to her, but I was sure that she was looking at my neck, my shoulders, and that she was reading me as well as if she were facing me. "I have to inform you about a missing person. Yesterday evening. No, it was the evening before that one." The notion of time had already gone awry. "Saturday evening, we went with 2 friends from New York to a party at the Ashbridges." "I know about it." Olson was a tall, blond man with an impassive face, high coloring, a crew cut. I have never seen him with a speck of dust or a crease wrong on his uniform. I have never seen him tired, either, or impatient. On the way home, late that night, we were stopped by the snow a few hundred yards from my house. The flashlight was going out. There were 4 of us, the 2 women in front, my friend and I behind them, trying to reach the house. Silence at the other end of the phone, as if the line had been cut again. It was irritating, and I could still feel Isabel's eyes on me. "Are you there? I'm listening." Mr. Dodd, the two women arrived safely. I finally reached the house as well, and it was only then that I realized that my friend was no longer beside me. Who is it? Ray Sanders, of the firm of Miller and Sander, the advertising agency on Madison Avenue. You haven't found him. I went out looking for him, basically without any light. I floundered around in the snow, shouting his name. With the blizzard, he would have had to be very close to you to hear you. Yes. When I felt my strength going, I went back inside. Yesterday morning, yes, on Sunday, yesterday, we tried to go outside, my wife and I, but the snow was too deep. Have you phoned your closest neighbors? Not yet. I assume that if he were with any of them, he would already have called me. That's likely. Listen, I'll try to send a crew over to you. It isn't snowplows we need, but bulldozers. Only one section of the road is more or less clear. Call me if there's anything new. In short, we had done what we could. I'd put myself in a good position with the authorities. They're coming, asked my wife evenly. Only one section of the road is clear. He says that snow plows are not what are needed, but bulldozers. He's going to try to send us a crew. He doesn't know when. She went to the kitchen to make coffee, while I took a shower and put on the same clothes as the day before. My gray flannel pants and my old brown sweater. Isabel had made some bacon and eggs for the two of us. And since Mona's place was still empty, she told me she's sleeping. I think she was a little surprised, though, by Mona's reactions, or rather, her lack of reactions. Would Isabel have behaved differently if I had been the one to get lost in the snow? Incidentally, I suddenly understood the strange emptiness I'd been feeling ever since my wife had touched my shoulder to awaken me. The wind had stopped blowing. The universe had fallen silent, with a silence that seemed unnatural after the hours of horrific noise we had just experienced. I turned on the television. I saw shredded roofs, cars entombed in snow, trees knocked down, and a bus turned over in the middle of the street in Hartford. I also saw New York, where men were trying to clear the streets, and a few dark figures were getting bogged down in the sidewalk snowdrifts. There had been no news from several ships at sea. One house blown away by the wind, another leaning crookedly, held up by a mountain of snow. Snow we had more than 3 feet of it at our own door, and could do nothing but wait. I made 3 telephone calls to Lancaster, the electrician, whose house is a half a mile as the crow flies from ours, to Glendale, the chartered accountant, and lastly to a fellow I don't like, named Cameron, who is involved somehow in real estate. It's Donald Dodd. Sorry to bother you. One of my friends wouldn't happen to have taken shelter with you, by any chance. None of the 3 had seen Ray. Only Cameron asked, "What's he look like?" before replying, "Tall, brown hair, about 40. His name, Ray Sanders. Have you seen him?" "No. I haven't seen anyone." When I returned to the kitchen, Mona was eating there. Unlike Isabel, she had not washed her face or brushed her hair, which was falling over her eyes. She smelled of bed. Isabel never smelled of bed, as my mother used to say. She smells clean. Mona's sloppiness and slightly animal casualness unsettled me, as did the questioning, indifferent look she gave me before asking in an artificial tone, "When will they come?" "As soon as they can. They're already on the way, but we'll have to wait for the road to be cleared." Isabel looked back and forth between us, and I cannot say what she was thinking, although she could divine the thoughts of others. It was impossible to divine her own, and yet she had the most open countenance imaginable. She inspired confidence in everyone. In the project she worked on, she was the one to whom the boring or delicate tasks were entrusted, which she accepted with her everlasting smile. Isabel is always there when you need her, to advise, console, assist. Outside of a cleaning woman who came 3 hours a day and 1 full day a week, she took care of the house and the cooking. She was also the one who looked after our daughters until they went off to Adams, the boarding school in Litchfield. Since there was no good school for them in Brentwood, there was perhaps a certain snobbery in that. Isabel had also gone to Adams, considered one of the most exclusive institutions in Connecticut. Isabel was not a snob. However, I have lived 17 years with her. For 17 years, we have slept in the same bedroom. I suppose we have made love several thousand times, yet I still cannot form a precise image of her. I know her features, the color of her skin, the blonde highlights of her slightly reddish hair, her broad shoulders that are becoming somewhat heavy, her placid movements, her bearing. She wears a lot of pale blue, but the color she prefers is a light mauve. I know her smile, never too wide, a slightly fixed smile that still brightens up her already naturally open face. But what does she think about, for example, all day long? What does she think of me, her husband, and the father of her daughters? What are her real feelings towards me? What does she think at that very moment of Mona, who is finishing her eggs? She can't love Mona, who is too different from her and who represents slovenliness, disorder, and God knows what else. Mona's past is not simple and straightforward like her own. Some of it is rather dubious. The Broadway nights, backstage at the theaters, the actors and actresses' dressing rooms, and her father, who saw nothing wrong with entrusting his daughter to one mistress or another. Mona had not shed tears. She was not crushed. Instead, she seemed like someone who feels that time is beginning to drag. Her husband was out in the snow somewhere, 100 or 200 yards from the house, a house that was not her home, which she wasn't used to, and where she must have felt like a prisoner. Now that the blizzard was over, that the snow had stopped falling, that the lights were back on, that we could communicate by phone and see the world live again on the television screen. We still had to wait for a crew to arrive from Canaan to begin moving thousands of cubic yards of snow. "I'm out of cigarettes," Mona announced, pushing back her plate. I went to get her a pack from the liquor cabinet. It suddenly struck me that we had eaten in the kitchen, whereas when we have friends visiting, we always have our meals, including breakfast, in the dining room, even on our own. Isabel and I eat our lunch and dinner in the dining room as well. We'd carried the girls' mattresses upstairs to the bedrooms, and the dirty glasses had disappeared. "I'll give you a hand." Mona was wearing her black slacks, her canary yellow sweater. She was helping my wife do the dishes. and I didn't know what to do with myself. I was thinking too much. I was asking myself too many upsetting questions. Those questions could not all have sprung from the time I'd spent on the bench in the barn. 17 years had not passed without me asking myself some of them. How was it possible that, until now, they hadn't troubled me? I must have answered them automatically with the appropriate responses, the ones you learn starting in school: father, mother, children, love, marriage, fidelity, goodness, kindness, devotion. It's true that I had lived like that. Even as a citizen, I took my duties as seriously as Isabel did. Is it possible that I never realized that I was lying to myself, and that in my heart I never believed in those edifying images? In our office, it's my associate, Higgins, whom I always call Old Higgins, even though he's only 60, who takes care of the buying and selling of property, the mortgages, the company and corporations, and, in general, all the technical business. He's a chubby, crafty fellow who in other times could have sold quack medicines at country fairs. He's sort of grubby and untidy, and I suspect him of exaggerating the vulgarity of his behavior the better to fool those around him. He doesn't believe in anything or anybody, and often shocks me with his cynicism. As for me, my domain is more personal, because I deal with wills, inheritances, and divorces. I have taken care of hundreds of them, because our clientele extends rather far beyond Brentwood, and many rich people live in the area. I am not talking about criminal cases. I don't think I've had to appear before a jury more than 10 times. I ought to know men and women. I thought I knew them, and yet, in my private life, I was behaving and thinking the way they do in what are called edifying books. Basically, I was still a Boy Scout. It's on the bench that I don't know where the two women are, probably in the guest room, and I'm wandering around alone in the living room and library, brooding over thoughts I'm not proud of, and I had considered myself someone with a precise mind. The sight of a man and woman making love in a bathroom had been enough, because that was really the starting point. Apparently, at least, there must have been other causes, earlier ones, which I would discover only later on. It was on the red bench, in the barn where the door was banging, that a truth occurred to me and changed everything. I hate him. I hate him, and I let him die. I hate him, and I kill him. I hate him because he is stronger than I am, because he has a wife more desirable than mine, because he lives a life like the one I would have liked to lead, because he goes through life without bothering about those he bumps aside as he goes by. Not a weakling. I am not a failure either. My life, I am the one who chose it, as I chose Isabel. For example, had I known Mona at the time, it would never have occurred to me to marry her, or to join a Madison Avenue ad agency. Such choices I made through neither cowardice nor laziness. All that is becoming much more complicated. I'm reaching an area where I suspect I will make unpleasant discoveries. Let's take Isabel. I met her at a dance in Litchfield, as it happens, where she lived with her parents. Her father was Irving Whittaker, a surgeon who was often called to Boston and elsewhere for difficult cases. As for her mother, she was a Claiborne, of the Mayflower Claiborne. It was neither her father's reputation nor her mother's family name that influenced me. It was not her beauty either, or her physical attractiveness. I wanted other girls much more than I wanted her calm, that kind of serenity she already possessed, her gentleness, her forbearance. But why would I have been seeking forbearance when I was doing nothing wrong? In short, I'd needed to have things all compatible and well organized around me, whereas I feel raging desire for a woman like Mona, who is the complete opposite. The important thing, my father used to say, is to make the right choice to begin with. He was talking about choosing not only a wife, but a profession, a way of life, a way of thinking. I thought I had chosen. I have done my best. I have worn myself out doing my best, and little by little, I have wound up hoping to see approval in Isabel's eyes. What I had chosen, in the end, was a witness, a benevolent witness, someone who, with a glance, would let me understand that I was keeping myself on the right path. All that had just cracked apart in one night. What I was envying in Ray, as in an ash bridge, was their having need of no one, of no one's approval. Ashbridge did not care if people mocked him because 3 wives in a row had cheated on him. He picked them young beautiful, sensual, and he knew in advance what to expect. Did he really not care at all? And did Ray love Mona? Was it all the same to him that before he knew her, she had been in the arms of so many men? Were they the strong men, and I the weak one? Because I had chosen to live in peace with myself. Well, that peace, I had not found it. I had pretended. I had spent 17 years of my life pretending. I could hear a rumble still in the distance, and when I opened the door, it grew louder. I realized that the snow removal machines were approaching, and I even thought I faintly heard men's voices. Would they find Ray today? That was unlikely. Mona would be spending at least one more night with us, and I was sorry that it would not be as on the first night. On a mattress in the living room, I could see her hand again on the floor. That hand I had so longed to touch, as if it had become a symbol. I was trying to escape, but to escape what for just over 24 hours now, I had known that in reality I was cruel, capable of taking pleasure in the death of a man I had always considered my best friend and capable, if necessary, of provoking that death. You're going to freeze us. I swiftly closed the door and saw that the two women had got dressed. Mona was in a red dress, my wife in a pale blue one. They looked as if they were trying to get back to everyday life. All that was still only a sham. Chapter 3. Towards 4 o'clock that afternoon, we noticed through the window that the machines were slowly attacking the snow, cutting a trench there with walls as crisp as cliffs. It was fascinating. We said nothing. We watched without thinking. I wasn't thinking. In any case, ever since Saturday evening, I had been outside my ordinary life, and as if outside of life itself. What I remember best was the presence of a female in the house. You would have thought that I could smell her, like a dog, that I went looking for her as soon as she left my sight, that I prowled around her, awaiting an occasion to touch her. I had an insane, irrational, animal desire to touch her. Did Mona realize this? She didn't talk about Ray 2 or 3 times. If that, I wonder if she, too, was not looking for some sort of physical release. And there was Isabel's gaze, following both of us, without anxiety, with only a touch of astonishment. She was so used to the man I had been for so many years that she had almost lost the need to look at me. Now she sensed the change. She could not help sensing it, and she could not understand it all immediately either. I can still see the immense snow removal machine appearing a few yards from the house, coming at us as if it were going to plow right through the living room. The beast stopped in time. I opened the door. "Come in and have a drink." There were 3 of them. 2 others were in a machine behind them. All 5 of them came in, stiff in their sheepskin jackets, their huge boots, and one of them had a frozen mustache. Simply their presence chilled the room. Isabel had gone to fetch the glasses and some whiskey. They looked around, surprised by the intimate calm of the house. Then they looked at Mona, not Isabel, but Mona. Did they, too, fresh from their silent battle with the snow, sense the warmth of a female? Cheers, and thank you for coming to our rescue. The lieutenant will be along. He's been told that the road is open. They were the kind of people who pop up only on rare occasions, like chimney sweeps, and who live God knows where the rest of the time. There was only one face I knew, but I couldn't remember where I had seen it. Well, thank you too. This warms us up. A refill. We wouldn't say no, but we've still work to do. The monsters lumbered out, surrounded by white powder, and soon, as night began to fall, we saw the pale headlights of a car at the far end of the trench. 2 men in uniform got out. Lieutenant Olson and a policeman I did not know. I was the one who opened the door, while the 2 women remained seated in their armchairs. "Good evening, Lieutenant. I'm sorry to have caused you this trouble. You've had no news of your friend." He went over to bow slightly to Isabel, whom he had met several times. I introduced him to Mona, the wife of my friend Ray Sanders. He accepted the chair brought forward for him. His companion, a very young man, sat down as well. "If you don't mind, Mrs. Sanders." He pulled a pen and notebook from his pocket. "Ray Sanders, you say? What address?" "We live in Sutton Place, in Manhattan." "What is your husband's profession?" "He's the managing director of an advertising agency on Madison Avenue, Miller." Miller and Sanders. Been there a long time. At first, he was the miller's attorney, and for the past 3 years, he has been their associate partner. Attorney, repeated Olson as if to himself. Ray and I, we studied at Yale together. I added, he was my oldest friend. There was no point to all this. You were just passing through, he asked Mona. I was the one who answered. Ray and his wife came to visit us on their way back from Canada. They were to have stayed here this weekend. Do they come often? The question threw me off balance because I couldn't see the point of it. Mona replied instead, 2 or 3 times a year. He looked at her attentively, as if her appearance were important. When did you and your husband arrive? Saturday, at around 2 in the afternoon. On your way here, did you have any trouble with the snow? A little. We drove slowly. You told me, Mr. Dodd, that you took your friends along to the ash bridges. That's correct. Do they know one another? No. As you must know, when old Ashbridge gives a party, he doesn't mind if there are 1 or 2 extra faces. A slight smile appeared on the lips of the lieutenant, who seemed to know a great deal about the Ashbridge parties. Did your husband have a lot to drink? He asked Mona. I wasn't with him the whole time. I think he was drinking hard. Yes. I had the feeling that Olson had already made inquiries. Doubtless through a few phone calls. And you, Mr. Dodd, I was drinking. Yes. Isabel was watching me, her hands crossed in her lap. More than usual. Much more than usual, I confess. Were you drunk? Not completely, but I was beyond my usual state. Why did I feel compelled to add, that has only happened to me twice in my life? A need for sincerity. Defiance, twice, exclaimed Olson. That's really not a lot. No. Did you have a reason to drink that much? No. I began with 2 or 3 whiskeys to put me in the mood. Then I began emptying all the glasses I could get my hands on. You know how it goes. Very much the lawyer. I was furnishing precise details. Was your friend Ray drinking with you? We ran into each other a few times. We'd exchange a few words. Happened to be in the same group, then be separated again. The Ashbridge house is big, and there were guests everywhere. And you, Mrs. Sanders. She looked at me as if for advice, then at Isabel. I was drinking too, she admitted, a lot. I think so. I stayed with Isabel for a while. And your husband, I only saw him at a distance 2 or 3 times. Whom was he with? With different people whom I don't know. He had a somewhat long discussion with Mr. Ashbridge, I remember, and the two of them went off into a corner to talk. In short, your husband behaved as he usually did on such occasions. Yes. Why? She looked at me again, amazed. I am obliged to ask you these questions because they are routine when someone goes missing. But it's an accident. I don't doubt that, madam. Your husband had no reason to kill himself. Correct. None. Her eyes grew wide, or to disappear without a trace. Why would he have wanted to disappear? Do you have any children? No. Have you been married a long time? 12 years? Your husband, at the Ashbridges, did he run into any old acquaintances? I was beginning to feel uneasy. Not that I know of. A woman? I saw him with several women, eh? He's always quite popular. No arguments. Nothing eventful that springs to mind. Mona blushed slightly, and I'm convinced that she knows what happened between Ray and Patricia. Did she, as I did, start to open the bathroom door? Did she see them leave that room? You were among the last to go. Now, it was obvious that the lieutenant had made inquiries. After us, there were only half a dozen people. Who was at the wheel? I was. I have to admit that, given the weather, you managed very well. 400 yards more, and you would have made it home. After the little bridge, there are always drifts. I know. For a few minutes, I had been hearing a new rumbling outside. Turning towards the windows, I caught sight of a bulldozer in the now complete darkness, working in the beam of a floodlight. Olson understood my unspoken question. Just in case, I ordered the search to begin despite the darkness. You never know, sir. Know what? If Ray was still alive, once out of the car, you walked in the dark. The flashlight was almost dead. I preferred to have the two women walking up ahead. That was prudent, sitting still on her chair. Isabel looked from one to the other of us, following the answers on each person's lips. almost as if she were knitting with her eyes. She was knitting the images that, one day, would perhaps form a perfectly organized whole. We two were holding tightly to each other, she said. Were the men far behind you? Quite close. The wind was so loud that we could hardly hear them when they called to us. Oh, you didn't have any trouble finding the house. Frankly, I wasn't exactly sure where I was. I believe I made it here on instinct. When you turned around, could you see the light at the beginning? A little. It quickly faded, then vanished. How long after you got home did your husband arrive? She looked at me as if questioningly. She wasn't uneasy, and she did not seem to find these questions rather bizarre, either, under the circumstances. Perhaps a minute I tried to turn on the lights and found that the electricity was off. I asked Mona if she had any matches. I went towards the dining room to light a candle in one of the candelabras, and Donald came in. What notes could the lieutenant be taking, and what purpose could they serve for him? He was addressing me now. Did you find the house easily? I literally bumped into it when I still thought myself a certain distance away. I was wondering if I mightn't have got lost. And your friend, I assumed he was next to me, meaning a few yards away. Now and then I would call, "Hey, hey." He would answer. Several times I thought I heard him, but the storm was so loud. Then, when I saw that Ray wasn't coming. How long did you wait? About 5 minutes. Did you have another flashlight in the house? In our bedroom. Yes. Since we hardly ever use it, we don't check the batteries, and they were dead. Did you go out alone? My wife and Mona were exhausted, and I was too. How did you find your way? As best I could. My idea was to go around, making bigger and bigger circles. You weren't afraid of slipping down to the bottom of the cliff. I felt I could avoid it. When you live someplace for 15 years, several times, I fell to my knees. Did you get as far as your car? I looked at the two women. I no longer remembered what I had told them about that. I had a sort of blank. I took a big chance. I reached it by accident. It was empty, of course. Yes. I rested there for a moment, out of the wind. And the barn. Did you check to see that he wasn't in the barn? For the first time since this unexpected interrogation had begun, I was afraid. It was as if Olson knew something I myself did not know, as if he were setting traps for me. Looking innocent and scribbling in his notebook. I found it because the door was banging. I called Ray's name and heard nothing. You went inside. I must have taken 2 or 3 steps. I see. He finally closed his notebook and stood up. Like a soldier, my thanks to all 3 of you, and I'm sorry to have disturbed you. The work will continue through the night, weather permitting. And to Mona, I suppose, madam, that you are staying here, but of course, where would she have gone? While they were searching for her husband's body in mountains of snow, we had dinner. I remember that Isabel heated up some canned spaghetti with meatballs. What day was it? Monday. I had done nothing all day but drag around. I had not gone to the office, which would have been impossible. But I felt guilty anyway. In the morning, I am usually the one who goes to pick up the mail at the post office. My days followed a well-defined routine I had grown attached to. There was a time for each thing, almost for each action. I still felt Mona's presence and wondered if it would happen. Not here, probably. And why not? She had just lost her husband, whose body the dark forms and their machines were searching for outside. Ray was a great guy. Ever since Saturday night, the 3 of us had been living on our nerves, Mona most of all. Isn't that the moment when you feel the need to throw yourself into someone's arms at war? Men get rid of their fears through explosions of sexuality. If we were to find ourselves alone in a room for long enough, safe in the knowledge that Isabel would not show up to disturb us. Nothing happened. We went to the window to watch the bulldozer, and I barely found a way to brush against Mona's elbow. We went to bed. Mona by herself, Isabel and I in our bedroom. What do you think of Olson? The question startled me, because it showed which way my wife was thinking. And I happened to be thinking of Olson as well. He's quite a good sort. People say he knows his job. I thought the conversation would continue, but Isabel left things there, without revealing whatever else was on her mind. It was only later, when we were about to turn the lights off, that she murmured, "I don't think Mona is suffering much. There's no way to tell, I replied evasively. They seemed much attached to each other. That word struck me. Attached. It's a common expression, I know. But I suppose people who use it have wound up forgetting its meaning. Human beings, two of them, attached to each other. Why not chained? Good night, Isabel. Good night, Donald. She heaved a sigh, as on every evening, to mark the end of her day and the beginning of a night's rest. She was asleep almost immediately, whereas I would often try for more than an hour to drift off. Mona was alone in the guest room. What was she thinking about? How was she lying in bed? I could hear the clanking sounds of the machines, and I imagined the men somehow passing the snow through a gravel screen. I woke up with a start in the middle of the night, hearing nothing anymore. I thought perhaps they'd found Ray. Why, in that case, had they not come to tell us I didn't move? I wonder if, in her sleep, perhaps sensing that I was awake, Isabel might have begun to listen as well. She did not stir, but her breathing became quieter. Everything was quiet, except an engine running far away, over by the post office. I was anxious for no reason. This sudden peacefulness seemed like a threat to me, and I was relieved when I heard the machine abruptly start up again. Had it broken down? Had they adjusted or greased it? Or had the men simply needed to take a swig of something? I fell back asleep, and when I opened my eyes, it was day. There was no aroma yet of bacon and eggs, but the smell of coffee filled the house. I got up. I put on my bathrobe, brushed my teeth, combed my hair, and went down in my slippers to an empty kitchen. There was no one in the dining room either, or in the living room. Assuming that Isabel was with Mona, I watched the machine at work. It had gone around the cliff and was now at the base of it. A figure appeared at the side of the barn, and I was stunned to recognize my wife. She had put on my sheepskin jacket and her boots and was managing to make her way through the deep snow. Did she catch sight of me in the window? The living room was in half light, and I had not turned on the lamps. I don't know why I preferred not to be there when she came back inside. That visit to the barn had something secretive about it and was evidently linked to either the questions the lieutenant had asked me or my replies. I retreated, went back to our room, and ran my bath water. I was hoping, without expecting much, that Isabel would come and join me, because I was eager to see if anything in her eyes had changed. She had heard the water running. She had probably also heard Mona getting up, for when I walked into the kitchen, bacon and eggs for the three of us were on the stove, and the table was set in the dining room. Good morning, Mona. Today, she was wearing a very clinging little black dress, and perhaps because her face looked tired, she was wearing more makeup than she had before, especially around the eyes, which gave her a different look. Good morning, Donald. I kissed my wife's cheek. Good morning, Isabel. She did not kiss me back. That was a tradition. I don't know when or how it started. It reminded me of my mother, who never kissed me and would automatically offer me her cheek or forehead. I realized right away that Isabel had understood. I had also known, since Lieutenant Olson's interrogation the previous day, what mistake I had made. During the entire time I had been in the barn, on my red-painted bench, I had smoked cigarette after cigarette, lighting them one after another, simply dropping the butts to the dirt floor and rubbing them out with my boot toes. I'd smoked at least 10. That's what Isabel had gone to get in the barn. While I was still asleep, the proof of my stay, of my sheltering there so long while I was supposed to be looking for Ray. She knew. There was no hint of accusation in her blue eyes. However, no new harshness, only astonishment, curiosity. She did not look at me as a stranger because of what I had done, either, but I had become someone else, someone she had known for a long time without intuiting his true personality. While we ate, we could hear the men working at the base of the cliff. Mona, intrigued by the quality of our silence, looked from one to the other of us and wondered, perhaps, if my wife might be jealous. This showed in a short remark, "I'm ashamed to be imposing myself for so long." Don't be silly, Mona. You know perfectly well that we think of you and Ray as family. I felt uncomfortable and ate quickly, As I stood up, I announced, "I'm going to see if I can go and get the car." I put on my boots, my jacket, my fur hat. I had the feeling that Mona was going to offer to go with me for a change of air, but she did not dare to. Below the cliff, the men were working more carefully, having reached the place where they were most likely to find the body. I followed the trench, where the frozen pathway had become slippery, and I felt liberated at being outdoors in the fresh air. Once again, recognizing my changed but still familiar surroundings. The men had pushed my car, still covered with snow, up against the side of the trench. I had to clear the windshield. I wasn't sure if the engine would start. It seemed as if a long time had passed, and that major difficulties must have ensued. Well, the Chrysler purred immediately into action, and I drove it carefully to our garage. This was a small wooden building painted white, facing the barn. I had to clear some space with a shovel to open the garage door, and inside I saw the Lincoln convertible Ray and Mona had driven down from Canada on Saturday afternoon. A few minutes later, I entered the barn. The big door had collapsed outside the building. There was a large patch of snow, but it did not reach the area around the bench. I looked at the ground. The cigarette butts were gone. When I went back inside, I looked immediately into her eyes, and she did not turn away, but looked back openly, calmly. What could I read there? So, I know. I had suspected it today. When you answered Olson about the barn, I understood. I went to see and arranged things so that others wouldn't know. Wouldn't know that I was a coward. Did she think it was because of physical cowardice? Because I was afraid of getting lost in the blizzard? That I had taken refuge in the barn? Why, then, was there no contempt in her eyes, no pity either? No anger, nothing. Wait. Yes, curiosity. You didn't have any trouble with the car, she asked, a little too brightly. No. Aren't you going to the office? I'll call Helen to have her get the mail. There shouldn't be any, because the delivery trucks have probably been unable to make their rounds. We were talking to no purpose. She had seen me go inside the barn, so I had to know that she had removed the cigarette butts. The dishes were already done. We looked at one another, all three of us, not knowing where to go or what to do. Mona felt even more strongly that something was happening and announced uncertainly, "I'm going to straighten up my room." The cleaning lady had not come. She lived beyond the hill, and the road that led through the woods to the village was probably not clear. Actually, I will go in as far as the office. It was unbearable to be shut up like that, waiting for the men to find the body. I got out the car I had just put away moments before. Once off the property, I found the road clearer, with signs that several cars had already passed that way. The main road looked almost normal, except for the height of the snow piled at either side. Most of the shopkeepers were busy with shovels, cutting paths to their stores. The post office was open, and I went in, waving to the cashier as usual, as if nothing had happened. In our post office box, I found only a few letters and a handful of brochures. Then I went to the office, here as well. Nothing had changed. Higgins was in his room and looked up at me in some surprise. "So, they finally found him?" I frowned. "Your friend Sanders? Are they still rummaging in the snow 5 years earlier?" We had built an attractive building of pink brick and white stone window surrounds on the site of the old offices. The door was white. The well-kept surrounding lawn was not visible for the moment, of course. But every year the grass sprang up into the sunlight by the middle or end of March. Helen, our secretary, was typing in her office and did not stop work to greet me. Everything was calm, orderly. My law books were in place in the mahogany bookcases. The hands of the electric clock advanced silently. I sat down in my chair and opened the envelopes one by one. Helen. "Yes, Mr. Dodd." She was 25 and rather pretty. She was the daughter of one of our clients, a building contractor, and she had got married 6 months earlier. Would she stay with us if she had a child? She claimed that she would. I wasn't so sure of that, and I anticipated having to find someone to replace her. I dictated 3 unimportant letters. The others are for Higgins. Had Isabel been shocked? Was our life going to be disturbed because of this, I wondered, without knowing if I desired that or not. The exaltation of the night in the barn had died down. Yet something still remained of it. My wife was right to look at me curiously. I was no longer the same man. Higgins had not noticed this. Neither had my secretary. Sooner or later, they would discover the transformation. I checked the time as if I had an appointment, and I did have one. In fact, only. It had no appointed time. I was eager to have done with the search out at Yellow Rock Farm, eager to have Ray's body found. I was eager to be rid of it. What would they do with it when they finally found it? That was not my business. That was Mona's concern. She was busy making her bed, tidying her room. There were no newspapers. The New York train had not arrived. Much quicker than I had expected. Helen brought me my 3 letters to sign. I'm going home. If something comes up, just call me. I walked past Higgins's office and shook his hand. Outside, I decided that it wouldn't be a bad idea to buy some meat, and I went to the supermarket. Have they found your friend, Mr. Dodd? Not yet. When you think that such things happen right next to us, and we don't even notice. Did you have any damage? Only the barn door. A house was blown away in Crest Hill. It's a miracle that no one was killed. Crest Hill is where our cleaning lady lived. Even though I was talking, looking around, going through the everyday motions, I was constantly asking myself, what does she think? From what I knew of her, she would not talk to me about it. Life would go on as always, with this secret between us. Now and then, I would feel her gaze on me, doubtless reflecting the same astonishment. Turning left toward our drive, I noticed that the machines were no longer running, and a few moments later, I saw from a distance the 2 women leaving the house in boots and heavy jackets. At the base of the cliff, men were standing around a form lying on the ground. They had found Ray. I put the car in the garage. I was calm. I felt no remorse. I experienced, on the contrary, immense relief. The women waited for me before going down the slope. I gave each of them a hand, which didn't prevent us from slipping, and the machine operators had to help us up. Ray seemed to be smiling under the fine sprinkling of snow that still covered his face and whitened his hair. His right leg was twisted, and one of the men told us it was broken. I wondered what Mona would do. She did not throw herself on the body. Perhaps she had wanted to for a moment, because she took 2 or 3 steps forward. Then she stopped, staring and shivering. My wife was on her right. I was to her left. It was to me she turned, ever so slightly, just enough to touch my shoulder and side, as if she'd needed my warmth. Then, looking at Isabel, I put my arm around her shoulders. Be brave, Mona. It was a natural thing to do. She was the wife of my best friend. The men around us seemed completely unfazed. Far from being offended, Mona seemed to press even closer to me. Only I felt it necessary to shoot Isabel a look of defiance. It represented another step, as if, with this apparently simple gesture, I were assuring her of my emancipation. She did not flinch and turned again to the body, which she contemplated with clasped hands, as one considers a coffin descending into the grave. Do you want to move him into the house? The crew chief stepped forward. The lieutenant advised us not to do anything until he arrived. Did you telephone him? Yes, I had instructions. We couldn't stay there in the cold, standing deep in the snow, waiting for the lieutenant to arrive from Canaan. Mona, come. I thought she was going to protest, but she allowed herself to be led away, and we had to climb the hill. I no longer had my arm around her shoulders, but I had done it. It was a victory. I suppose he slipped, she said. Once we were back up, poor Ray. The 3 of us were walking. 3 dark figures in the white scenery, and I felt that this must be grotesque. Below, the men started up their machine again to disengage it and probably go and work somewhere else. Would you make some coffee, Isabel? We followed her into the kitchen, where she set water to boil. She was the one who asked the question, "What are you going to do, Mona?" "I don't know." "Does he still have any family? A brother who's an embassy attaché in Germany? Didn't he ever tell you anything?" "About what?" "The arrangements to make in the event." Calmly, she searched for the words and found them. "In the event of an accident." He never talked about that. The thing is, there are arrangements to be made, continued Isabel, thus taking on the most unpleasant tasks. Do you think he left a will? Mona and I said no at the same time. If Ray had drawn up a will, I explained, he would have done it with me and left it with me as well. Do you think, Mona, that he would have preferred cremation? I don't know. We each took our cup of coffee into the living room. Out the window, we could see the police car arrive and the lieutenant and another officer go down to the base of the cliff. Within 10 minutes, the lieutenant appeared alone at the door and removed his cap. "May I offer you my condolences, Mrs. Sanders?" "Thank you." "It's just what you thought. Mr. Dodd." He swerved over towards the cliff and slipped, fracturing a leg in his fall. Had I said that to him, I no longer remembered. I think he, too, was looking at me in a different way. "I'll have the body taken to the funeral home, and you will merely have to give them their instructions." "Yes," murmured Mona, who did not seem to understand what was expected of her. "Where do you intend to have him buried?" "I don't know." "At Pleasantville," I suggested. It was the large cemetery in New York, probably. "Is there any family, a brother, in Germany?" We began again, words, lips moving. But I was not listening to the words. I was watching the eyes. I think that I have always watched the eyes, or, rather, that I have always been a little afraid of them. There were Isabel's eyes. Those I was familiar with. I had known since that morning what astonishment they expressed. Yet she was the one carefully watching the lieutenant. She had realized that he was glancing at me from time to time, as if something about this business were bothering him. I am convinced that if the lieutenant had attacked me, she would have come to my rescue. You'd have thought she was waiting only for that moment. As for Mona, it was towards me that she turned whenever she was asked a question, as if I had naturally become her chief support. This was so apparent, and her attitude revealed such confidence and surrender that Olson must have thought we were bound by some intimate relationship. Was that why he was less cordial towards me, a trifle contemptuous? I thought, "I will leave you to do what is needed. As far as we're concerned, the case is closed. I regret, Mrs. Sanders, that this tragedy took place here in our town." He rose, bowed to the two women, and finally held out his hand to me. In good faith, I'm not so sure. I suspect that he's hiding something. Either his men found something suspicious that puts me in a tricky position, or else Olson, believing me to be the lover of my best friend's wife, despises me. Would he suspect me of taking advantage of the chance to push Ray off the cliff. I hadn't thought of that before. It was so plausible, so easy. And why, first of all, did I have the two women walking ahead when I carried the only, albeit feeble, flashlight we possessed? I was the one most familiar with the cliff, since it's on my property, in front of my windows. I could hold Ray by the arm, lead him off to the right, push him at the proper moment. I was scared to think that Olson might have found the cigarette butts in front of the bench in the barn. Would he have come to the same conclusions as Isabel? Exactly what were Isabel's conclusions? What proved to me that she did not, in fact, believe that I had pushed Ray? In which case, her silence became a kind of complicity. The defense of her home, our two children. She kept her eyes on me when I opened the liquor cabinet. A drink will do you good. Mona, would you like one too? Isabel, no, thanks. I went to get the glasses and ice from the kitchen, holding her drink out to Mona. I said, "Courage, my dear Mona," as if I were staking my claim. This time, Isabel noticed. For a moment seemed startled. I had never called her that, my dear Mona. "I'm going to telephone the funeral parlor," announced Isabel, heading for the library to use one of our two telephones. Was it to leave us alone? After taking a swallow, Mona turned to me, smiling a little sadly. "You're a nice man, Donald." Then, after a glance where Isabel had just gone, she seemed about to add something, but in the end said nothing. Chapter 4: Snowstorm and Decision. Donald Dodd stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered fields, the wind whistling through the cracks in the door, making a cold whistling sound. The blizzard had not yet ended, and Ray Sanders was still caught in the sleet, his body shivering with cold. Donald feels a stark contrast: his desire to keep his own secret, his jealousy of Ray, and his fear of his friend's potential death. Survival instincts and morality collide violently in his mind. Meanwhile, Patricia Ashbridge remained close to Ray, unconsciously creating psychological tension with Donald. Warm feelings, sexual conflicts, and jealousy made it difficult for Donald to control his behavior. Donald took a deep breath, concentrating on his next steps should he go out and save Ray immediately? Or should he delay and test his moral limits? The blizzard was not only a physical challenge, but also a metaphor for the psychological turmoil that was engulfing him. The dim light from the house reflects Donald's tense but determined face. Each next move will determine Ray's fate and reveal Donald's true nature. Between desire, fear, and conscience. Chapter 5. Survival Risk. The blizzard howled through the windows, shaking the house with its strong winds. Donald Dodd stood in the living room, his eyes tense, watching Ray Sanders in the snowy yard. The cutting wind made Ray's body tremble, making each step difficult. Donald knew that just a small mistake or a moment of hesitation could cause Ray to be seriously injured or freeze to death. At the same time, his jealousy and anger towards Ray made Donald wonder, should he save him now or see where his own moral limits were? Patricia Ashbridge stands near Ray, creating both emotional and social pressure on Donald. Her presence heightens the tension and emphasizes the contrast between personal desire and moral responsibility. Donald took a deep breath, trying to calm his breathing. He knew that his next move would determine Ray's fate and reveal his own true nature. The blizzard was not only a physical challenge, but also a metaphor for the psychological turmoil, moral conflicts, and desires that were raging inside Donald. The light from the flickering lamp illuminated his tense but determined face. Every step, every decision now was a test of survival and conscience. Chapter 6. The Turning Point. Snow was falling heavily, blanketing the fields and paths around the house. Ray Sanders, shivering and near exhaustion, struggled toward the house. Each step a test of survival. Donald Dodd stood in the doorway, his eyes following Ray's every move. A mixture of tension, control, jealousy, and fear made him consider every step. Every second was a test of morality and survival instinct. Patricia Ashbridge stood beside Ray, her eyes filled with concern and curiosity, forcing Donald to confront social pressure and internal emotions at the same time. This moment was not only a matter of saving his friends' lives, but also a psychological challenge, forcing Donald to decide between desire and responsibility. The blizzard was a metaphor, isolation, pressure, and danger, making every action vital. Donald stepped outside, controlling his breathing, preparing for any contingency that might arise. The dim light illuminates his face, reflecting intelligence, tension, and determination. Every decision now will determine Ray's fate and reveal Donald's true nature. Between desire, fear, and morality. Chapter 7. Tense Night. The snowstorm outside continued to howl, blanketing the yard in white. Ray Sanders trudged along, his body shaking, while Patricia Ashbridge stood nearby, her eyes both worried and stirring up complex emotions in Donald Dodd. Donald stood in the doorway, his heart pounding, fear, jealousy, and desire mixed together. Every small action, every step Ray took could change the situation, saving lives or endangering survival, revealing secrets or losing control. He took a deep breath, pondering whether to salve him now or to test his morals and limits. This moment was a battle of wits, instincts, and conscience, where the light from the flickering lamp clearly reflected the tension on Donald's face. The blue room in his mind, Andre's image flashes, a reminder of warmth, but also of risk and danger. The outside space, the white snow, the howling blizzard, is a metaphor for internal conflicts and moral tensions reaching a boiling point. Light, darkness, truth, and secrets converge. Donald's next move will determine Ray's fate and reveal his true nature through desire, fear, and conscience. Chapter 8. The Ultimate Danger. The blizzard howled through the windows, blanketing the entire surroundings in white, creating an atmosphere of absolute coldness and tension. Ray Sanders was near exhaustion, his feet walking slowly through the thick snow, his body trembling. Donald Dodd stood by the door, his heart pounding. Fear, jealousy, and desire mingling. He knew that the slightest mistake would put Ray in danger and reveal untold secrets. Patricia Ashbridge remains by Ray's side, her eyes curious but filled with concern. Her presence forces Donald to confront the moral and emotional tension between his desire for control and his responsibility to save lives. Donald took a deep breath, deciding to act. He quickly opened the door, rushed into the snowstorm, and headed toward Ray and Patricia. This moment was a test of survival and morality, save or abandon. Control the urge or let it control his actions. The flickering light of the lamp, the white snow, and the darkness blend together, reflecting the tension and determination on Donald's face. Each next step will decide Ray's fate, revealing Donald's true nature between desire, fear, and conscience. Chapter 9, Open Ending. The storm had abated, but a thick blanket of snow still blanketed the yard and driveway. Ray Sanders gasped for breath, his body shaking, but he was still alive thanks to Donald Dodd's quick decision. Donald stood by, panting but with a determined look in his eyes. He looked back at the whole thing, every moment, every decision, every small action was a test of morality and survival instinct. Jealousy, desire, and fear mingled in his mind, creating an unforgettable inner climax. Patricia Ashbridge stands near Ray, her eyes filled with concern and curiosity, forcing Donald to balance his personal desires with his duty to save lives. This moment reveals Donald's true nature, a man who is both rational and impulsive, and facing his own moral limits. But the dangers are not over. The blizzard is only a physical challenge, while conspiracies, secrets, and social and legal pressures still exist just out of sight. Donald understands that sobriety, intelligence, and vigilance will always be the weapons that guide the next challenges. Dim light, darkness, secrets, and risks converge. Donald Dodd, having just experienced a long and tense night, will continue to walk between light and darkness, ready to face the dangers, conspiracies, and challenges ahead. Chapter 10, Snowstorm and Decision. The blizzard continued to whistle through the cracks in the windows, blanketing the walkways around the house in white. Ray Sanders trudged wearily, his body shaking, each step a test of survival. Donald Dodd stood in the living room, his hands shaking, but his concentration strained. His desire for control, his jealousy, and his anxiety were all mixed together. He had to weigh each step, save Ray now, or delay, testing his morals and his limits. Patricia Ashbridge stood near Ray, her eyes filled with concern and curiosity, adding to Donald's emotional pressure. This moment was a test of survival and morality, to save or to abandon, to control one's urges or to let them rule one's actions. Donald took a deep breath, controlling his breathing and preparing for any unexpected situation. The light from the flickering lamp illuminated his tense but determined face, reflecting his intelligence and survival instinct. Each subsequent decision will determine Ray's fate and reveal Donald's true nature. Between desire, fear, and conscience. Chapter 11. The Ultimate Night. The blizzard howled through the windows, blanketing the entire campus in white, creating a cold and tense atmosphere. Ray Sanders trudged along, nearly exhausted, each step in the deep snow a test of survival. Donald Dodd stood by the door, his heart pounding, a mixture of jealousy, desire, and fear. He knew that the slightest mistake could put Ray in danger or reveal a secret that had yet to be revealed. Patricia Ashbridge stood beside Ray, her eyes both worried and curious, pushing Donald into a strong psychological pressure between personal desire and responsibility to save people, between instinct and morality. Donald took a deep breath and rushed out into the snowstorm, towards Ray and Patricia. Each step determined Ray's fate and revealed Donald's true nature: intelligence, survival instinct, desire, and conscience. The dim light from the flickering lamp illuminated Donald's tense but determined face. The blue room in his mind, the image of Andre and the warm memories, was a reminder that risk and desire go hand in hand. Chapter 12. Open ending. The blizzard finally subsided, but snow still blanketed the entire campus. Ray Sanders gasped for breath, his body shaking, but luckily he was still alive thanks to Donald Dodd's timely decision. Donald stood by, eyes tense but determined. He reviewed the entire episode, every action, every small decision, every moment a test of morality, intelligence, and survival instinct, jealousy, desire, and fear mingled in his mind, creating a dramatic internal climax. Patricia Ashbridge stands near Ray, her eyes filled with concern and curiosity, forcing Donald to balance his personal desires with his duty to save lives. This moment reveals Donald's true nature, a man who is both rational and impulsive, and facing his own moral limits. Socio-legal and conspiratorial dangers remain. Donald realizes that sobriety, intelligence, and vigilance will always be the weapons that guide him through the next challenges. Dim light, darkness, secrets, and risks converge. Donald Dodd, having just experienced a long and tense night, will continue to walk between light and darkness, ready to face the dangers, conspiracies, and challenges ahead.